problem. The Turks hid them and they got mad later and got rid of them.
Now, do you think your father was in the Harcourt region in 1909? 1909? Because that wasn't so far before 19...
Yeah, he would have been because he was in Russia right before that.
Okay, so he was probably in Batum,
Yeah.
which is now Georgia, of course.
Oh, he had a horrible time there.
Yeah.
And I guess he complained so bitterly that let him go back in
But
where he wanted.
one thing I'm hoping to drag up one day is that in 1909, that's an important date for Armenians as well, in that after Sultan Hamid was deposed in 1908, as part of the Young Turk Revolution, there was a brief period of a counter-revolution in 1909. They attempted to get the Sultan back in power. It was unsuccessful, and they did a lot of hangings and so forth. But the Young Turks who took over at that time had gotten their nose out of joint for a number of complicated reasons. But they started massacring Armenians in the city of Adana. Adana is in the area they call Cilicia, which is southeastern Turkey. Okay, Adana is a big city now. But the Adana massacres of 1909 did in fact apparently spread a little bit into the area, and they would have taken hold in Harput, except, they say, for the American consul. And my guess is that this person was your father,
Oh, I think it was.
who helped put the lid on things and quiet it down so that major massacres did not occur in 1909. The big ones were in 1896.
He knew a lot of important Turks, I know.
Okay.
Because he was meeting them all over the world when he was in Europe, because a lot of them were in Europe after the World War II.
Okay, so it seems likely that her father put the lid on things in Harput area.
Oh, he was crazy about Garabit. He would have done anything.
Everyone seems to have been. They say he was a really fine fellow, and Garabet died in Fresno not so long ago, and he's got a great-grandson in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I haven't been able to contact him yet. But Leslie Davis, and even Mrs. Davis, up until the time she died, he died in '61, the mom died in the '70s, but even well until, up until she died, Garabet kept correspondence up with them. And Caleb has some of this correspondence, Caleb being Caleb Woodhull Davis,
Well,
who's
as I
the
was
eldest
saying,
son.
Mother got a letter from him when he came to Boston, because Daddy had always said, look him up. But we couldn't do anything for him, and we never heard of him again. She
Yeah,
wrote
well, he
back
moved from Boston to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and then from Pawtucket, Rhode Island,
Well, she
apparently
wrote
went
back
to
to him
Fresno.
once and told him to keep in touch for heaven's sake, but she never heard again. I guess he was moving then.
Yeah.
He
Well,
probably
there's an
didn't get a
interesting
letter.
thing. There's a picture that I've asked to have copied. We may see it. Once we leave Carrollton, we're going to go to Oberlin College. Now, the reason why we're going to Oberlin is that there was a professor of horticulture and botany at Cornell, where I did my degree, named Lawrence H. McDaniels. Now, Professor McDaniels was, he must have been what we now call 4F during World War I. He was not drafted, but he and his wife felt they wanted to do something as part of public service during the war. So he ended up joining the Near East Relief Expedition to the Harput area. And the interesting thing is that Garabet Bedrosian, who was your father's kavas and secretary, and who was Leslie Davis's kavas, etc., was also Professor McDaniel's kavas and secretary. So there's like 3 generations, if you will, or 3 consecutive people who he helped out. In fact, it was Bedros, kavas, Garabet Bedrosian, who had given the Leslie Davis pictures to McDaniels to bring to the United States. And they ended up in the USA, and the story is from McDaniel's daughter, who's still alive in her 80s, living in Austin, Texas, and very alert. She said that her father had pictures made of the Leslie Davis genocide pictures, as I refer to them, and sent them to the State Department. Well, these were promptly lost or misfiled, and they are not to be found now. Years later, a woman who did an edited book, her name is Susan K. Blair, did an edited version with an introduction of Leslie Davis's final report that he wrote in Port Jefferson, Long Island, taking it to Washington, where it too was misfiled, but Susan Clay Blair rediscovered it and found it. She was working for an Armenian Roman Catholic priest as an assistant, copy editing and things that he was doing on. He's now deceased, but to make a long story short, the book was published with some of these pictures from Leslie Davis had been hidden in a well by God Abed, and this was attested to on a film that I'll tell you about later. And it was dug up when the war was over. Kavas God Abed gave these pictures to McDaniels, who brought them to the U.S., apparently made the copies, sent them to Washington, and kept a set for himself in an old shoebox. This old shoebox, instead of all these old shriveled up pictures that Davis took apparently, they're rediscovered by Blair, published in the book, hardly visible because they're very, very faint. No one knows where the originals are now. So part of my job is to try to find out where they were. Now, a lot of the McDaniel stuff is on file at Cornell, but it's mainly scientific papers and so forth. Some of the more personal things are at Oberlin, getting back to the full cycle, because both McDaniels and his wife were Oberlin undergraduates. They went to school at Oberlin.
Well, as I was saying, Miss Miney wrote me about his dissertation was at Penn, I think.
So I wonder what, where that thread can lead.
I don't know how in the world he found out about, of course I do. He went to the State Department, I imagine.
Okay.
They still have all his correspondence because a cousin of mine looked him up about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Did you come from New York, Carroll?
No, I came from California.
You were in New York first.
No, I went to California. I had a scholarship out there. And after the war, I went to New York because all my theater friends were going to New York. And then in '52, I was offered a job in California, and I went back out there.
When did you actually come here to live with Miss Ruth?
I was 58, my mother came with me, and she died in '60. And then I went back to New York, and then I worked in Washington. And then I decided to put my feet up. I had done enough everywhere. So I came back and lived with Ruth. I don't like to live by myself. I think this last 10 years.
So when your mother married your father, they married, once again, where did they get married?
Look,